there everyone, my name is Payana and welcome to my weird and wonderful planet. And today I'm going to be telling you about the time I was a victim of international parental child abduction. So first of all, what is international parental child abduction? The US Department of State website defines it as the removal or retention of a child outside of their habitual country of residence in breach of another parent or guardian's custody rights. This most commonly happens when a couple decide to move abroad, have a child or move with their child, and then after a period of time decide they want to go back to their country of origin, splitting up from their partner and taking their child with them, thus resulting in parental abduction. And yes, it is a crime, and in the UK it's punishable by 6 years of prison. So what happened in my case? Well, my parents are both British in origin, and they decided to move to France in 1990, where I spent most of my life because I wasn't even a year old at the time. I don't remember ever living in the UK or anything at all. I'm more French than I am British, despite my accent. I was abducted by my mother, and in order to fully understand the full extent of what happened, I need to first explain to you what my relationship with my mother was like up until this point. If a parent is willing to tear their own child away from their home and family in order to take them to a completely different country, regardless of how they feel about it, usually they're a pretty dodgy person to begin with, and my mother's not an exception to that. My mother's the kind of person who enjoys having a certain status in the world. So when I was born, she acquired the status of being a mother. And that meant that she could now join mothers' clubs and mothers' groups. And so she did. She joined a mothers' club where the club gave its members a certain list of books that they needed to buy. Now, being given this piece of information as an adult, I can't help feeling that maybe this club or group had some kind of arrangement with whatever editor published these books in order to maybe get some financial gain out of it. But I have no evidence for that. My mother's the kind of person who relied on traditional gender roles, so she didn't have a job, and my dad did all the work and literally put himself in life-threatening situations in order to give her the financial stability that she required. And she also required he purchase this complete list of books, which turned out to be pretty dear. And did she read them? No. Did she look after me at all when I was a baby? According to my dad, she didn't. My dad had a lot of experience with small children, his youngest sister being born when he was 16, so he was perfectly happy to take on his role as a caring dad. My mother was just happy telling everyone that she was a mother and I was her daughter. Was she ever proud of me being her daughter? Well, it didn't feel like it, and it definitely doesn't feel like it today. When I started school, I experienced quite a lot of pretty severe bullying, and when I approached my mother with this information, her reaction was, "If the other kids are mean to you, it's because you're a mean little girl. You need to be nicer, and then other people will be nicer to you." Did I follow this advice? Yes, I followed it for the best part of 25 years, in fact, and it almost ruined my life, but that's a story for another video. The consequence of this bullying meant that as a 7-year-old, I started suffering from depression, and when my dad came to my mother pointing this out, her reaction was, "He's a child, it's normal to be depressed when you're a child." I literally don't know what to think of that. Overall, I don't really have any memories of my mother being the kind and loving parent she was supposed to be. She was always around because she didn't work, and I went everywhere with her, and I worshipped her. I looked up to her. She was the person I wanted to be when I grew up. I really don't want that anymore. In 1997, when I looked like this, my mother made a decision. She made the decision to split up with my dad and go back to live in the UK without telling him, of course. Because why would she? Parents divorcing or splitting up is pretty much every child's nightmare. We all dread that one day our parents might sit us down on the settee and say things like, Mummy and Daddy have decided that they don't want to live together anymore, but don't worry, we'll still see you and we still love you and it's definitely not your fault. Whilst those conversations are dreadful and often have devastating consequences, they aren't beneficial because they inform the children that the parents are still going to be there for them, that they still love them, and that it's not the child's fault and they don't need to blame themselves for any of it. No one ever told me that. So on a bright day in 1997, my mother came to collect me from school at midday in order for me to have my afternoon lunch. Okay, she came to collect me and I got in the car and found that there were several of my toys there. Now my mother never let me take toys in the car, so I thought this was weird and asked her about it, to which she responded, well, I thought they would like to come and collect you from school. This sounded rather odd to me because my mother didn't usually express any interest in my feelings and what I wanted, so something was up. I was taken home and served crepes for dinner, which was again a bit odd because we never had crepes for dinner. Crepes were for Saturday evenings, but they were my favourite meal, and obviously my mother knew this because she did pay some kind of attention to me, and she gave me crepes with chocolate, and I was thrilled and also confused. When it was time to take me back from school, she left a half-eaten crepe on her plate on the table. My dad was there, even though I don't remember him being there, and he commented on this saying, aren't you going to finish that? And she was like, no, I'll finish it when I get back. She never came back. This was just a ploy in order to try and reassure my dad and manipulate him into thinking, I'm not going away, I haven't finished my dinner. Because my mum is a wonderful person. We drove up the road, and when we got to the end of it, instead of turning right to take me back to school, she turned left. I asked her why she was doing this, and she said, I'm leaving your dad. We're going back to England. Then I asked her why she was taking me with her, because I had no interest of going back to live in the UK, and her answer still haunts me to this day. Because I want you to be with me. Not, I want to be with you because I'm your mother and I love you. No, I want you to be with me, regardless of how you feel about it. So how did I feel about this? I lost my shit. I made that pretty clear. I started screaming, yelling, banging on the sides of the car. I even tried to get out of the car, only I couldn't because the car my mother had didn't have back doors and the windows couldn't open. So I was essentially trapped. I felt like I'd been put in a cage and driven to somewhere I didn't want to go against any of my wishes, and obviously without even being warned. All I could think about was trying to get out of this terrible situation I'd gotten into. I just wanted to run away, but that became very complicated. On our way to the ferry port, my mother decided to stop off in a hospital where we went to see a man I didn't know. He was in a hospital bed and he was dying. I later on found out that this man was one of her lovers. I know she had at least 3, because once again, wonderful person. Interestingly, 2 of the 3 of my mother's lovers that I know of died very shortly after her leaving. Obviously, I don't believe she had anything to do with that. I just think it's an odd coincidence. But I digress. When we got to the ferry port, we met up with some friends of the family, some British people who were on their way back from a trip to the UK. And this, to me, was the perfect point to try and slip away from my mother. When she went to a telephone booth to call my dad in order to break the terrible news to him, she left me in the custody of these people. And I decided to play the card of, I'm going to see where my mother is in order to run away. Only they wouldn't let me. They were like, no, don't, you'll get lost. You don't try and find mummy. Mummy will find you. Had they heard the words, I'm being kidnapped by my mother, from a child to whose her mother was always making a show of what a brilliant mother she was, I'm not sure they would have believed it. So I suffered through the journey to the UK, and where we got to go and stay at my aunt's house, and well, I was still losing my shit, basically. I remember spending a vast amount of time screaming, and when I realised that that screaming wasn't going to do anything, because my mother essentially ignored me, things got really dark. I got very depressed. I would cry myself to sleep at night. I didn't want to go to school, and hated every second of it. And I was just miserable all the time. I never thought that it was my fault and that this situation had anything to do with anything I had done. It was just traumatic, and I kept wondering why this would happen to me. What did I do to the universe to deserve this much pain, especially as an 8-year-old child? To me, that period of time felt like the moment I started really growing up, and the moment I did grow up, I was kind of forced to live through a situation that would be difficult enough to deal with as an adult. I even remember coming down the stairs one night crying, saying to my mother, I don't want to become an adult. At the time I didn't really understand why I was feeling that way, but today I do. I'd been forced to grow up. I'd had everything that I loved about my innocent childhood torn away from me. Now, obviously my dad's had to deal with the notion that his wife had run away and abducted his own child. And back then, no one really cared. Parental child abduction, especially international parental child abduction, is seen as a very big deal and a serious crime in 2020. However, in 1997, this just was not understood. When my dad called the police and told them what happened, they simply said, well, the wife has taken your daughter back to her country of origin. It's not an abduction. She's just taken her on holiday. So my dad had to sit at home completely powerless, hoping that eventually my mother would let him see me again. And she did. I was allowed to go and see him during the school holidays. And I remember not wanting to go back to the UK. And eventually, my mother agreed that I could go back and live with my dad. So things turned out okay in the end. I mean, I still had to live through a devastatingly traumatic experience, but at least I got to choose with which parent I wanted to live. And after several months of my mother having to deal with my uncontrollable bouts of rage, she probably just got tired of me. Aside from the fact she never really cared for me to begin with. So this next part is about the consequences of that traumatic experience and what it was like for me once I got back to live with my dad. Because obviously the memories and the trauma of what had happened didn't just go away. I had to deal with them and live with them. And back then, taking your kid to see a child psychologist wasn't a thing. And the terrible thing, the thing that made it even worse, is that no one around me actually cared. When I got back to my school after several months of absence, no one asked me where I'd been. No one asked me what happened or if I was okay. I was even told that the kids had had fun beating up my bag, because obviously it stayed at school, having been abducted in the middle of the day. That was fun, and you know what? I just went back to being bullied the same I was before I left. It was like I'd never been gone. I did, however, try to talk about this with some adults. I especially remember trying to have a conversation with the mother of some of my friends, telling her what had happened and how angry I was. All I got in response was, "Your mother, how dare you talk about her in this way?" In the 1990s, the fact that a mother could be a bad person or do something bad or traumatic or damaging to their child was unthinkable. Mothers had this kind of magical aura around them. It was impossible to be a bad mum, and mums were things that should be worshipped. The general opinion about what happened to me was, well, you were with your mum. How bad could it be? Well, I'm about to tell you. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not fun. And yes, mothers can give their children PTSD. It happens. And it happened to me. So aside from the flashbacks and recurring nightmares, some of which I still have to this day, there were a lot of psychological and behavioural consequences. The one I remember the most is the fact that I was completely terrified by the idea of sleeping alone in my bed. I had to sleep in my dad's bed, which was thankfully now vacant, now my mother was gone. But when you're a 9-year-old, or indeed later on a 10-year-old, the knowledge of having to sleep in your father's bed is something really shameful, because that's for babies. And that's also something a number of adults pointed out to me. Because literally no one cared or even thought for half a second that I might be affected in some way by what had happened. The other completely irrational fear or indeed terror I had was that I would die if I went to the toilet on my own. I know this sounds ridiculous, but that's what it was like. I couldn't go to the toilet on my own because there was a corridor right in front of the bathroom. And for some reason, I knew that if I crossed that corridor without my dad there to protect me, I would die. So for almost a whole year, every time I went to have a shit, my dad was there watching. Glamorous. To this day, I still don't know why my mother left my dad and why she put me through all this trauma. She could have just moved to another village had she really wanted to be apart from my dad, but why did she have to move back to the UK? She'd expressed on a number of occasions how angry she was with her older sister and indeed her mother, and how she didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore, so why was she suddenly going back to live with them? In a house identical to my grandmother's, I have to point out. I don't know. But this left me with a profound fear of being abandoned. And because that's essentially what happened. She left, took me with her, abducted me, and then abandoned me. And when you've been abandoned by your mother, who's supposed to love you more than anyone in the world unconditionally, you start thinking, well, if my mother doesn't love me, who else could? And every time I've been abandoned by a friend or someone I knew, it's just served to reinforce this notion that I'm a shitty person that no one could ever love. This also had devastating effects on my life, but again, stuff for another video. The other side effect of this is I don't trust anyone. I trust my dad because he's the only person who's ever been there for me. But apart from him, I don't trust anyone. Not even my boyfriend, with whom I've been for 9 years. 9 years, he has chosen to be in a relationship with this. Which must mean something, but every time he leaves or goes on holiday to see his mum or visit some friends, I'm always terrified he's not going to come back. And the worst thing is, I think it's because of something I've done. Not doing the washing up enough, or not cooking food the right way, or not doing the cleaning enough. And I know it's stupid and irrational. I know. But the feeling never goes away. So what was my relationship with my mother like after this happened? It was complicated at best. Recently, my dad came across a number of letters that my mother would send to me when we were still on speaking terms, when I was a young teenager and later on an older teenager, Now, the thing was, whenever I received these letters, I didn't read them because I didn't care. But my dad, having come across them by accident, realised that they all had a pretty common theme. And that theme was, my mother never asked me how I was. When you start a letter, be it to a friend or a family member, usually you start it with, hello, how are you doing? Or how are you? Or I hope you're better for whatever reason. My mother started all of her letters with, I'm better, or I'm well again, because she always seemed to believe that she was sick, even though she never really showed any symptoms. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't say for definite that she had from Munchausen syndrome, but again, stuff for another video. But I would go and visit her during the holidays, and yeah, I guess it was okay. Like, we would talk and we would go out shopping together and she would buy me a shit ton of stuff. It felt more like visiting a friend I didn't see very often than visiting my mother. And the terrible thing was, she would get on board with pretty much everything I was doing and never express anything she wanted to do or anything she liked. And this has been a running theme pretty much since the beginning. I know nothing about my mother. I know nothing about the life she had before she met my dad. In my mind, that's when her life started. I know pretty much everything about my dad's past, but my mother, it's just a black hole. I know nothing about her. The terrible thing is, she never explained why she did what she did, why her life seemed so terrible that she had to tear me away from everything and traumatize me for the rest of my life, why she wouldn't just come back to live in France but away from my dad, why any of it. And I have to live today with not knowing. Even after having asked her on multiple occasions and friends of the family asking her to tell me on multiple occasions, she never actually did. She never even expressed any kind of remorse for what she did for me. And that's the thing that hurts the most. If she could simply acknowledge that I went through a terrible trauma and it was her fault. So yeah, I still have these recurring dreams. And they're always the same. She comes and knocks on my door, I open the door, and I scream everything that I want to say to her. All the anger, all the rage, all the trauma. I just scream it in her face. And then she says, I'm sorry. And then we go back to being mother and daughter. And that's it. Now, I haven't had this dream for a while. Last time was about a year ago. But it still haunts me. And what haunts me even more is the fact that I know it's never going to happen. Recently, I got back in touch with one of my family members, and she told me about my mother. She said that, well, she didn't say it, but she kind of implied that my mother was sad that we weren't talking anymore. Now, the reason we're not talking is she chose not to talk to me. She sent me an email saying that I was no longer her daughter, that she was disowning me and that I was never to try and contact her or any member of her family again. And I respected that for 8 years. Until one day I snapped, because I actually liked her side of the family. I never had any issues with them, and I wanted to find out what was going on. So I got in touch with one of my cousins. She said it was a difficult situation for both of us to be in. And I wanted to say, it's not a difficult situation for me. The day she told me she didn't want to talk anymore was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Because I was constantly wondering what she was doing, where she was. Sometimes months would go by and I didn't have any news. And now I don't need to worry about that anymore. Sure, I was sad to find out that my grandma had died in 2017, despite the fact I thought that she died in 2011, but I didn't have any news, so yeah. The circumstances in which she disowned me were also pretty weird and dark. I was in an abusive relationship at the time, which I'd been in for the past 4 years. And my mother knew I was in this obviously abusive relationship because A, I told her about it, and B, she'd actually witnessed my ex behaving badly with me. So when I finally split up with him, I sent her an email asking her for her support. The only problem is, my ex got to her first, and she adored him. Because obviously, anything that happened to me was my fault. Like, everything she taught me when I was a kid and now I was an adult, it didn't make any difference. So she sided with my ex. And never spoke to me again. And I want it to stay that way. I know it might seem harsh, but I know she's never going to change. I know she's always going to be a liar. I know she's never going to admit that she did anything wrong to me. And I don't want to have to deal with these feelings anymore. I've been very happy getting on with my life, and I want it to stay that way. I don't want to have that stress anymore or be reminded of the trauma. Even if she were to apologize for it, I know she doesn't understand what she did or why what she did was wrong or any of the consequences it had on me. The thing that always stuck with me in that email was when she said that I was a terrible person and that she didn't understand me. What I wanted to say was, well, maybe if I'd been given more motherly love, I wouldn't be such a shitty person. Maybe if you'd educated me and brought me up in a caring and loving way like a mother should, I wouldn't have disappointed you so badly. Well, I did what I had to do to save my own life and protect my child. And she seems to think that that's wrong. Well, let her think that. And if she is indeed upset by the situation that we're in now, the one that she caused, then she's going to have to live with that too. So the reason I brought up my ex and the abusive situation and relationship I was in is because for the last part of my video, I want to talk about how my own abduction was used against me. When I split up with my ex, we obviously went to child custody court, and in the process, the courts ruled that I was not allowed to take my child to the UK, that my kid was forbidden to travel without explicit permission from her dad because she was in danger of international parental child abduction. Was that true? Absolutely not. Did my ex know that? Of course he did, but the court didn't know that, and his lawyer didn't know that. So he lied to them, telling them that I was going to abduct my child, that I had actually explicitly said that I was going to take my child to the UK, which I would never do, because guess what? I know what the consequences of doing that are, and I would never inflict them on my kids, and I don't want it inflicted on any other kids. When you go to court, something you desperately need is evidence. Did my ex have any evidence of me wanting to run away? No. What he did have was a statement from a man I had met maybe twice in my life saying that I was going to run away. This man said that because I was from the UK, obviously I would go back there. He also said that there was a phone number on the telephone. He said it was my telephone, but it was actually my ex's home phone. But again, the court didn't know this. He gave the phone number, which was my mother's phone number. And obviously, my ex, having got to her, knew that she was never going to talk to me again. But this man stated in his written statement that I might run away to stay with this person. Interestingly, the last person between me and my ex who have had contact with my mother was my ex. But again, the court didn't know that, and I had no way of proving it. At this moment, I am waiting for a court session that's due next week in order to get the travel ban on my daughter removed so that we can take her to the UK and visit her family whenever she wants to. She's gonna be 12 years old in 2 weeks, and she's only ever seen her family once. Obviously, I'm not gonna go back to the UK. But the court doesn't care. The only good thing about this situation is the fact that now courts and indeed the legal system take international parental child abduction seriously. Serious enough to have it enforced on a child who is not concerned by it with no evidence. It would have been nice if they'd have asked me about it though, because I could have disproved it really, really quickly, but yeah, it's taken 9 years to get this to go through the court and have the travel ban removed, in which time I had to prove that I'd worked in France and had applied for French citizenship, and indeed French nationality, which I have. So you are looking at a future French person, because Brexit happened and things have changed. But again, other videos. What my ex essentially did using the court was to punish me for something that I was a victim of, which is equally as traumatizing. Whilst researching information for this video, I came across a documentary on the Real Stories YouTube channel, which was precisely about international parental child abduction. This interview was pretty good, but it only went at it from the adult's perspective, the parent's perspective. At no point were any of the children interviewed or asked how they felt about this, which I thought was a shame. Because the consequences of this, obviously for the parents, are devastating, but they're also pretty bad for the children. I'll link this documentary in the description, and I'll also put up the numbers you can call in the US and in the UK if you are aware of any international child abduction situations, or if, just if anyone's concerned by this. I only found the numbers in the US and in the UK, but obviously if you're from Canada or anywhere else in the world, do feel free to put those phone numbers in the comment section, because this is a serious issue and people need to be told about it. So to finish this, I just wanted to talk about the adults who think that doing this kind of thing is okay. Children are human beings. They might be small human beings with not a lot of life experience, but they're still human beings, and they have thoughts and opinions and emotions and feelings. And if you think it's okay to rip those feelings to shreds in order to pursue your own selfish desires in your life, then you don't deserve to be a parent. If you really feel the need to split up with your partner and there are children involved, sit down and talk about it with them. Try and find an ideal way of doing things and involve the children in that conversation. Ask them what they want, what their thoughts are. Obviously, they're probably going to say, I don't want mommy and daddy to split up, but sometimes it's inevitable. And they need to express their thoughts and feelings on that. So having these conversations are important. And I really, really wish that I was there when that conversation happened, even though it never happened. So that's it. I think I've said everything I wanted to say in this video. It's been pretty long, and honestly, I have never put this much work into a YouTube video. It's taken me a really long time to sit down in front of a camera and express my own feelings and thoughts about what happened in my past, and I've tried doing it before, but it just ended in tears and me getting angry, and honestly, I'm proud of myself for having kept a calm and composed air about me all the way through this. I hope that this has been helpful in some way, and if you are a victim of international parental child abduction, I'd really like to hear from you, because I am yet to meet anyone who is actually a child victim of this. You hear a lot about the parents who are left behind, and obviously that's devastating. As a parent, I completely get it. It's every parent's worst nightmare to have their child snatched away from them. But I'd really like to hear from you. If you were one of those children, leave me a comment, tell me your stories. I'd really like to know. And also, don't hesitate to subscribe to this channel. This is my first video of this type. I'm hoping to make this video all about anything that's not books, basically, because I have another YouTube channel where I just talk about books all the time, because I'm pretty book obsessed, as you can see. So yeah, this is about everything else, basically, my life, things I like. I'd like to do videos about the kind of music I listen to, about the clothes brands that I like, anything. So don't hesitate to subscribe, leave me a comment, and check out my other channel if you're interested in books. And I'll see you all next week for video number 2, and I don't know what it's going to be yet, so we'll see. Mwah! Bye-bye. I don't have an end screen for this channel yet. I need to work on that. I haven't got round to it yet, but I will have an end screen sometime in the future. I don't know what it's gonna look like yet, but there will be an end screen, so yeah.